Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. A cross-country road trip, a young mother traveling alone, a motel room left untouched, and a rental car found abandoned, its hazard lights still blinking on a rural stretch of Pennsylvania highway. In April of 1994, 23-year-old Karen Denise Wells set out from Oklahoma to visit a friend in New Jersey. But she never made it. Somewhere between her motel room and a late-night fast food run, she vanished. No struggle, no goodbye, just a trail of strange clues, hundreds of unexplained miles on the odometer, and questions that still haven't been answered. This is the story of a disappearance that feels less like someone got lost and more like someone was erased. Today, we dive into the baffling case of Karen Denise Wells. Born September 22, 1970 in Oklahoma, Karen Denise Wells, who preferred to be called Denise, lived a life shaped by love, struggle, and fierce determination. Her parents divorced during her childhood, and she spent her early years in South Dakota with her father before returning to Haskell, Oklahoma to live with her mother. As a teenager, Karen found herself in several difficult circumstances. She fell in with the wrong crowd, began drinking, and saw her grades slip. She eventually landed in South Dakota again, but there she was convicted of forging checks, a mistake she paid for with probation. Yet Karen's life was not defined by her mistakes. It was defined by redemption. Returning to Oklahoma, she announced she was pregnant in 1992. Embracing single motherhood, she gave birth to her son, William Blake, who she called Willie, and he shaped her world. She took a part-time job at Haskell Airport and started an affair with her married boss, a sign of the complicated relationships she juggled while trying to rebuild her life. By the time April 1994 rolled around, Karen was 23 years old, living in Haskell, raising her son with love and dedication. Friends and family remember her as someone who handled her life well and loved her child. She was small in stature, at 5'6", 115 to 120 pounds, with blonde hair, blue-green eyes, and glasses perched on her nose, a quietly unassuming but strong young woman. By all accounts, she was responsible. She managed her responsibilities with a resilient spirit. Despite early setbacks, she performed her job at the airport, cared deeply for her son, and stayed in contact with loved ones. So why did Karen book a road trip to New Jersey in April of 1994? A friend of hers, Melissa Shepard, someone she'd known since high school, needed help. Karen, always supportive, volunteered to help, even if it meant taking her baby to her grandparents for a few days while she drove cross-country. The plan was practical. Drop Willie off with grandparents, rent a car, meet Melissa in New Jersey, then drive back home in a few days. This wasn't reckless. It was caring. It was responsible. It was hopeful. She packed her bags and rented a white 1993 Plymouth Acclaim in Tulsa. She mapped her journey, planned pit stops, called Melissa from Oklahoma, and again when she crossed into Pennsylvania. She was steady, grounded. Friends who've spoken to local news say they remember Karen as warm, loving, just a bit rough around the edges. Someone who'd made mistakes, but learned from them and moved forward. That's who this story is about. That's the woman behind the headlines. A law-breaking teenager who reinvented herself, became a beloved mother, and volunteered to help a friend halfway across the country. A woman weighed by responsibilities, striving for a better life. A woman full of hope. And that makes her disappearance more than just a tragic missing persons file. It makes it a life interrupted. It takes her from being just another case and turns her into someone we lost too soon.
Are you currently folding laundry while listening to the details of a horrific murder?
Yeah, you're definitely addicted to true crime.
And while a different ad may be of better help to you, we're here to feed your obsession, not fix it.
Welcome to a Trial by Podcast.
Your weekly dose of unsettling, mind-boggling, and occasionally absurd true crime stories.
Just search
A Trial by Podcast
wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday.
So we'll keep the crime coming. You just keep doing whatever weird thing it is you're doing.
Before we get to the facts of her disappearance, let's rewind, not just to April of 1994, but into the world of 1994. It was a time before constant connection, before smartphones, before Google Maps. If you wanted to know how to get somewhere, you pulled out a paper map, maybe a Rand McNally, or stopped at a gas station to ask directions and hoped the guy behind the counter didn't steer you wrong. You might have had a Walkman in the passenger seat, a mixtape you made off the radio. Songs like The Sign by Ace of Base or I Swear by All for One. On the radio, you'd catch stories about Nancy Kerrigan and Tonya Harding. O.J. Simpson hadn't fled down the freeway yet. But America was on the edge of a new era in media and obsession. The internet existed, barely, but it wasn't part of daily life yet. Most people didn't even have email. If you wanted to call someone, you hoped they were home. If you were driving alone, you were really alone. And if something went wrong on the road, you were on your own. That's the world Karen was navigating. That April, she left her son in the care of her grandparents and set out on the long road trip to help her friend from Oklahoma to New Jersey. Driving cross-country back then was equal parts freedom and vulnerability. Every turn, every stop, every stranger you met, it all required trust. Trust in your car, trust in your instincts, and sometimes trust in people you barely knew. It was common to go hours without checking in. If someone didn't show up on time, you waited, because people were often just unreachable. That was normal. It was a classic solo drive, fast food stops, payphone check-ins, motel reservations made ahead of time. She was cautious, organized, and very aware of her surroundings. She called her friend along the way. She let people know where she was. She did everything right. For Karen, this trip was supposed to be a quick getaway, a temporary break. Her destination, Bergen, New Jersey, where an old friend was waiting. There was nothing about this trip that pointed to what would happen. And yet, something did happen. After driving more than 1,000 miles, she made it to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, a quiet, historic town in the middle of the state. It's surrounded by farmland and forest, nestled in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains. There were antique shops, old stone churches, diners with blinking neon lights. In 1994, it looked like a place frozen in time, the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors. But just outside that small-town charm were long, empty roads, dense woods, and quiet stretches where you could drive for miles without seeing another soul. Karen checked into the Pike Motel, a no-frills roadside stop just off Harrisburg Pike. It was a simple place, not fancy, but practical. Travelers came and went, with little trace left behind. She called her friend around 7 p.m. to let her know she'd arrived safely. She said she was going to grab something to eat, probably McDonald's, and then take a nap before they met up later that night. It should have been a normal night on a long drive. But Karen never made it to dinner. She never made it to her friend, and she never returned to her motel room. Sometime between that phone call and the early morning hours, she vanished. So how does a careful, responsible young woman on a mapped-out, well-planned road trip go from checking into her motel and calling a friend to disappearing hours later? To understand how quickly things unraveled, we have to take a look at the timeline, the small, specific window of time when everything changed. Because Karen didn't disappear without clues. There were phone calls, there were sightings. Her motel room offered one version of her story, and her car, later found abandoned on a rural mountain road, offered another. We'll piece together the last confirmed moments of Karen's trip, We'll follow her through those final hours from her arrival in Carlisle to the moment her white Plymouth Acclaim was found with its hazard lights blinking in the dark. That's where this story starts to fragment, where strange behavior, conflicting details, and unexplained mileage starts to raise serious questions. Let's retrace Karen's final steps. Karen left Oklahoma on April 10, 1994. It was a Sunday. She had just 23 years behind her. Young mother, full of hope and responsibility. Her baby boy was just over a year old, and she left him safely in the care of her grandparents before setting out across the country to New Jersey. The drive was over 1,300 miles. She was making the trip alone in a white 1993 Plymouth Acclaim rented from a Tulsa dealership. It was the kind of car you wouldn't look twice at in a parking lot. Standard, unremarkable, reliable, a quiet kind of safe. Now, the plan was simple. Head east, take it in stages, and stop when she needed to. She checked in regularly with her friend Melissa, the one she was going to see, in Bergen, New Jersey. And Karen was smart. She called often. She let people know where she was. She made hotel reservations. She stuck to the plan. And everything went according to that plan, until it didn't. On Tuesday, April 12th, 3 days into her journey, Karen pulled into Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She arrived in the early evening and checked into the Pike Motel. It was a simple spot, the kind of roadside stop that served traveling salesmen, truckers, and people just passing through. She was assigned a room. She unpacked her suitcase, laid out her clothes, opened a magazine, lit a cigarette, maybe just to relax after so much time on the road. Everything inside the room said she planned to come back that night. At around 7 p.m., she called Melissa. She told her she'd made it safely to Carlisle and she planned to grab a bite to eat at McDonald's, then take a quick nap before meeting up later that night. Shortly after 8 p.m., Karen returned to the front desk. Witnesses say she asked the clerk for directions to the nearest McDonald's. They told her the route, she thanked them, then walked out to her rental car and drove off. That was the last time anyone ever saw Karen. At midnight, Melissa showed up at the Pike Motel as planned. She knocked on the door. No answer. Worried, she got the clerk to open the room with a master key. And that's when things turned from strange to deeply unsettling. Inside the room, it looked like Karen had just stepped out. Her suitcase was open on the bed, her clothes folded nearby, her magazine, half read, still on the nightstand, her cigarettes untouched. The bed, still perfectly made, the room key sat right there in the open. But there was no sign of Karen. And then, 5.5 hours later, just before sunrise, came the most chilling discovery of all. At 5:30 in the morning on April 13th, a motorist driving through Perry County on a rural stretch of Route 274 spotted something odd. A white car was sitting on the side of the road, hazard lights still flashing. Both front doors were wide open. The engine was off. No one was inside. It was Karen's rental. The location was deep in the countryside near the edge of Tuscarora State Forest, roughly 35 miles from the motel. Remote, isolated, not a road you'd end up on by accident. The car was out of gas, its battery was dead, and inside was a scene that made no sense. There were maps, empty soda bottles, a bag of Hardee's fast food, not McDonald's like she'd mentioned. Her shoes were in the car too, like she'd taken them off and never put them back on. Investigators also found marijuana, cocaine, and a pipe inside the vehicle. A discovery her family insisted did not align with who Karen was. She was a mother. She was responsible. She was cautious. Then came something even stranger, her purse. It was found tossed in a ditch near the car. The cash was still inside there. And the most puzzling detail? The odometer. The rental had been driven an extra 600 to 700 miles that couldn't be accounted for based on her known route. It had mud splashed up on the sides, scratches suggested it had been taken off-road. Where had she gone? And who had gone with her? The scene painted a picture, but not one anyone could understand. No sign of a struggle, no trail, just a car left in the dark, its hazards continually blinking. Investigators searched the area, by land and by air. There was no trace of Karen, no footprints, no belongings, nothing. She was simply gone. And that's where the trail ends, at least for now. A motel room she never returned to, a fast food bag that didn't match the plan, hundreds of extra miles on a car that was supposed to be on a straight route, and a remote road where someone, maybe Karen, maybe someone else, decided to leave everything behind. What happened in those final hours between Karen leaving her motel room and her car being discovered abandoned is a mystery filled with contradictions. But while the timeline gives us the when and the where, it doesn't tell us the why, or the how, or who else might have been involved. That's where the investigation begins, with a car left behind, questions piling up, and a case that would soon spiral far beyond a missing persons report. Because as authorities started digging, they uncovered a trail of strange details, dead ends, and eerie possibilities that still haven't been resolved 3 decades later. Let's step into the search and investigation. When Karen vanished into the Pennsylvania night in April of 1994, what followed wasn't just a search. It was a slow unraveling of a mystery that has haunted her loved ones and investigators for over 30 years. In the hours after Karen failed to show up at her motel, and after her rental car was found abandoned on a rural stretch of Route 274, the case was turned over to the police. At first, it may have seemed like a simple missing persons report, but that changed quickly. The more investigators learned, the stranger things got. Karen's car, that white 1993 Plymouth Acclaim, had been left in an odd spot. Not on the side of a highway, not in a parking lot, but on a remote backwoods road near Tuscarora State Forest. A place so out of the way that even locals didn't casually pass through it. The scene raised more questions than it answered. The hazard lights were still blinking, the battery was dead, the car was out of gas, and both front doors wide open. It didn't look like someone had stopped for help. It looked like someone had vanished in a hurry. Inside the car, police found the fast food from Hardee's, not McDonald's, which Karen said she was heading to just hours earlier. Her shoes were there, along with empty soda bottles, maps, and her purse, tossed in a nearby ditch with the cash still inside. Nothing was stolen, and yet everything felt wrong. More disturbing were the traces of marijuana and cocaine inside the car along with a pipe. Now, Karen's family insisted the drugs didn't make sense. She had smoked marijuana before, but cocaine? That wasn't her. Not when she was making a long solo trip across the country. Not with a baby boy waiting for her back home. But now we've got to get to the strangest detail, the odometer. The car had been driven an extra 600 to 700 miles beyond the mapped route from Oklahoma to Pennsylvania. No one, not investigators, not her family, not even Karen's friend, could account for where she might have gone, or why. Police from multiple jurisdictions launched a full-scale search. State troopers, local law enforcement, and later, the FBI joined in. They brought in scent-tracking dogs and conducted aerial searches with helicopters and canvassed the area around where her car was found. But there were no footprints, no trail, no clothing, no signs of a struggle, no sign of Karen at all. It was like she disappeared into thin air. And then came something even more unsettling. Months later, around Thanksgiving 1994, someone claiming to be Karen made a call. The woman on the line said she had gotten married, that she was okay, and that she just didn't plan on returning home. But that call was never verified. Authorities couldn't prove it came from Karen, and her loved ones didn't believe it did. It felt like a cruel trick, a red herring, or maybe a cover-up. As the investigation dragged on, one thing became very clear. Foul play was definitely suspected. Karen hadn't left voluntarily. She hadn't run away to start a new life. She was a young mom, close to her family, devoted to her child, and there were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends that didn't line up with any logical explanation. The drugs, the wrong fast food, the hundreds of mystery miles, the eerie, empty road. Investigators began to suspect that Karen wasn't alone that night, that someone else had been in the car with her. Despite interviews, leads, and ongoing efforts, no arrests have ever been made. No one was publicly named as a suspect. But behind the scenes, detectives believed, and still believe, that people interviewed during the early days of the investigation knew more than they said. Even years later, cigarette butts and drink cups from the car were tested for DNA. As of now, those results, if they turned up anything, haven't been shared with the public. In the decades since her disappearance, her son, who's now an adult, has never stopped hoping for answers. He remembers investigators coming to collect DNA samples from him as a child. He remembers the questions, the silence that followed, the ache of not knowing. And in 2025, more than 30 years after Karen vanished, the Pennsylvania State Police issued a renewed appeal for help. A $5,000 reward is now being offered for new information that could finally bring this case to a close. Because someone knows what happened to Karen. Someone was there. And someone has stayed silent long enough. When the timeline and details begin to blur, what becomes clear is that Karen didn't simply vanish by choice. No footprints, a car displaced on obscure back roads, and midnight whispers of a frantic getaway. That all points to something much more sinister. One of the most chilling theories is that Karen encountered a stranger on one of those Pennsylvania back roads, someone who preyed on a lone traveler. The odds of being alone on a remote stretch near Tuscarora State Forest in the middle of the night were pretty slim. It's possible the person who pulled up to help was the very one who never let her leave. Like I said, investigators suspected foul play early on. Then there's the theory that Karen wasn't alone, but not a stranger. Records show she may have driven well past Carlisle, even reaching Schaeferstown and Burnville, before doubling back west towards the forest roads. Did she meet someone en route? Someone who knew those quiet, secluded roads better than she did? The notion that investigators believe some people interviewed knew more than they admitted is unsettling. What if it had something to do with a drug-related encounter? Inside the Plymouth were traces of marijuana and cocaine, substances her family strongly insisted were out of character. Could Karen have picked someone up who was using? Was she coerced into giving them a ride? A kindness that turned malicious, or something more overt? The presence of narcotics doesn't define her, but it may have defined the scenario she stepped into. Could this have been premeditated? With her purse, cash still inside, tossed in a ditch, theft doesn't seem to be the motive. Could this have been a premeditated extraction by someone who needed her gone? Someone who didn't care about ransom or robbery, but about control? Someone who took the opportunity to lead Karen off the known trail and simply vanish. The miles driven off-road, the scratches, the mud, it all suggests this grew more orchestrated as daylight faded. The real question, who is to blame? No one was ever formally charged, but whispers still circulate about a familiar face in the area that night, maybe someone who knew the roads or knew Karen personally. Her boyfriend's wife, the man she was having an affair with, was the one that claimed someone posing as Karen called around Thanksgiving 1994, telling her she'd remarried and wasn't coming back. A call authorities dismissed as likely fake. What if that was a manufactured red herring? Someone trying to imply Karen simply disappeared by choice, or silencing a truth she couldn't speak. Now, imagine the evidence from 1994, the abandoned cups, cigarette butts, fast food crumpled, a smudged fingerprint. reanalyzed today with 21st century science. DNA touch technology can pull DNA from surface skin cells on those cups or the car door handle. Genetic genealogy, the same method that cracked the Golden State Killer, could link unknown DNA on those items to a family member, narrowing the suspect pool dramatically. Or there's 3D crime scene reconstruction, using laser scans and mapping, which could digitally reimagine the sequence of events, revealing paths through the dirt, vegetation, and other subtle clues missed in 1994. Pennsylvania State Police began DNA testing of cigarette butts and cups in 2008, hoping they'd find matches in criminal databases. Despite no public breakthroughs, it doesn't mean the tip of the iceberg hasn't been found, only that it hasn't been revealed yet. Karen's son, now grown, has provided his own DNA, hoping that it may one day lead to her or the answers he needs. Like I mentioned, in early 2025, state police reignited the investigation, offering a $5,000 reward for new information that might crack the case wide open. Because investigators still believe that someone, possibly one of the people they talked to in those early months, knows something far more crucial than what's been shared. What if a lab report, a database match, or a forgotten piece of evidence could finally crack that mystery? Because the truth remains. Someone knows what happened to Karen. And with science on our side, that knowledge might not be locked in silence forever. Now that we've walked through the theories, the unanswered questions, the strange details, the people who might still be holding back the truth, let's step back, not from the case, but from the silence it left behind. Let's talk about safety, about being alone on the road, about the risks that come with long-distance travel, and what we can do to make those miles just a little safer for those who follow. These are travel tips, shaped by experience, grounded in reality, and built with Karen's story in mind. Cross-country road trips have long held a certain kind of freedom. Just you, the open road, a good playlist, and a destination waiting ahead. It's a rite of passage, a chance to clear your head, explore or reconnect with someone, just like Karen was doing in April of 1994. But as Karen's story reminds us, traveling alone, and especially as a woman, comes with risks that can't be ignored. She did so many things right. She mapped her route, she called her friends to check in, she booked her motel ahead of time. But still, she disappeared. And while what happened to her wasn't her fault, there are lessons we can take, things we can do better to protect ourselves and stay safer on the road. So if you're planning a solo road trip, or know someone who is, here are a few essential tips to carry with you. Consider them part of your emergency kit, just like your spare tire, phone charger, or water bottle. Because in today's world, it's not just about where you're going, it's about making sure you get there safely. Starting out, let someone track your route. If Karen had been driving today, she could have dropped a pin, shared her live location, or used an app like Life 360 to let loved ones follow her in real time. But in 1994, that technology just didn't exist. She checked in using a landline. That's what people did. Today, make use of those tools. Before you leave, send someone your entire route, including planned stops, hotel addresses, and arrival times. If plans change, update them. Even texting, "just got to the hotel," can make a big difference if something goes wrong. Stay on major roads and in well-lit areas. Karen left her motel in Carlisle, and her car was later found 35 miles away, off a rural highway near Tuscarora State Forest, a remote stretch of road that most people wouldn't find unless they knew how to get there. So avoid shortcuts through unfamiliar back roads or wooded areas, especially at night. It might be tempting to take the scenic route, but when you're driving solo, safety beats scenery. Stick to highways and roads with gas stations, truck stops, and foot traffic. And trust your gut. Karen was described as careful, attentive, and organized. But if she picked someone up or agreed to meet with someone during those missing hours, we don't know whether she felt safe. All we know is that she never made it back. If something feels off, a stranger at a gas station, someone following you, a wrong turn that makes you uneasy, don't brush it off. Don't talk yourself out of your instincts. Trust that feeling. Turn around, drive to a crowded place, call someone, pull into a police station or a large open business like a Walmart or a 24-hour diner. Don't wait until you're in a situation where you have no good options left. Prepare your car like your life depends on it, because it does. Karen's car was found out of gas, battery dead, doors open. It's possible someone else ran it into the ground, but it's also a reminder that preparation matters. Before you hit the road, check everything: tires, fluids, battery, lights. Keep an emergency kit. Make sure it includes a flashlight, jumper cables, bottled water and snacks, a phone charger and backup battery, pepper spray or personal alarm, a blanket and change of clothes, and a paper map, just in case your GPS fails. And check in often, even when you think you don't need to. One of the hardest parts of Karen's case is how quickly she went from all good to gone. She made it to her motel. She made that phone call. She said she was grabbing food. And then, nothing. So even if you're just running out real quick, check in. A simple message: heading out to grab dinner, should be back by 8. That gives people a time frame. And if something happens, they can start looking sooner, not later. Be cautious about who you trust, especially when you're traveling alone. Whether Karen met someone along her route or had someone in the car that night, the odometer on her rental told a chilling story. An extra 600 to 700 miles that were never explained. Scratches and mud on the car showed it had been off-road. Did someone lead her away from safety? When you're alone, you don't owe anyone your trust. Not the stranger who offers to help you pump gas. Not the person in the parking lot asking for directions. Not even a fellow traveler who just wants to chat. Politeness is optional. Your safety isn't. And finally, always let someone know when you feel unsafe, even if it's just a gut feeling. Karen did everything we'd want someone to do. She checked in. She followed a plan. She drove in daylight, stayed in touch, booked a motel. And yet, she still disappeared. We can't change what happened to Karen, but we can learn from her story. We can take her name off of a forgotten list and turn it into something that protects the next person on the road alone. Traveling solo can be freeing, empowering, even magical, but it should never mean disappearing without a trace. So if you're heading out, whether it's 30 miles or 3,000, take precautions, set boundaries, prepare smart, and always remember, you deserve to arrive safely. Karen Denise Wells was a young mother, a devoted daughter, a friend, a woman trying to do the right thing, to help someone else, to make it back home to her son, to build a life after mistakes and second chances. And somewhere along a quiet stretch of Pennsylvania back road, she vanished. Her suitcase was still packed, her motel bed still made, her car abandoned, doors open, hazard lights on. It's been over 30 years, and there's still no closure, no justice, and no trace of Karen. But her story isn't over. It's a case that still whispers from those rural roads, from the unsolved mileage on her odometer, from the silence of those who might still know something. At the time of her disappearance, Karen was 23 years old. She was white with blonde hair and striking blue-green eyes. She stood about 5'6" and weighed around 120 pounds. She was petite, soft-spoken, and often wore glasses. If you have any information about her disappearance, please contact the Pennsylvania State Police at 717-249-2121 or the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Even the smallest detail, something you heard, something you remember, could bring answers to her family and help close a case that has been open far too long. And if you're listening because you care about safety, about justice, or about the people who vanish far too easily, share this episode. Keep Karen's name alive. Because the more we talk about her, the harder it is for her story to be forgotten. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/The Last Trip Podcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.